story begins in a high school locker room, where a full-bodied and awkward student, Robbie, is enjoying a carefree moment. He thought he was safe in the shower, but suddenly a group of bullies storms in, grabbing Robbie and dragging him into the gymnasium during the final school assembly. Wearing nothing but humiliation, the big guy made it his life's mission to become the ultimate alpha, a walking nightmare for every bully who ever dared to laugh at him. In the gym, Kelvin Joyner, better known as the Golden Jet, stands at the pinnacle of high school glory. He's moments away from receiving the coveted Student of the Year award, the crowd roaring in admiration. But just as the ceremony reaches its peak, chaos erupts. The doors fly open, and Robbie Weirdick, humiliated and completely exposed, is hurled onto the stage. The cheers instantly shift to uproarious, merciless laughter, filling the room like a tidal wave. As the gym erupts, Kelvin's confident smile fades. While everyone else revels in Robbie's humiliation, Kelvin acts. Without hesitation, he steps forward, slips off his bomber jacket, and drapes it over Robbie's shoulders. The laughter begins to die as Robbie, shielded by Kelvin's simple act of kindness, scrambles off the stage. Kelvin quietly returns to the podium, leaving an impression on everyone in the room, especially Robbie. Fast forward 20 years, and Kelvin's life is far from the bright future everyone predicted. No longer the golden boy, he's now an accountant, stuck in a job he doesn't like, envying co-workers who climb the corporate ladder while he stays in place. At lunch with his wife Maggie, who was once his high school sweetheart, Kelvin watches his colleagues celebrate a promotion nearby. The cheerful scene only deepens his feelings of inadequacy. Maggie tries to cheer him up, showing off the dress she's excited to wear for their upcoming 20-year reunion. But Kelvin hesitates, eventually admitting he doesn't want to go. Frustrated, Maggie tells him his negativity is wearing down their relationship. Back at work, Kelvin scrolls through Facebook, aimlessly trying to distract himself. A friend request pops up from someone named Bob Stone. The name doesn't ring a bell, but curiosity gets the better of him and he accepts. Almost immediately, he receives a message from Bob, asking to meet. After a brief back and forth, Kelvin realizes something shocking. Bob Stone is Robbie Weirdick from high school. Surprised and intrigued, Kelvin agrees to meet him that evening. When Kelvin tells Maggie, she's skeptical, but eventually remembers Robbie and lets him go. At the pub that night, Kelvin is greeted by a towering, muscular man who radiates confidence. Bob Stone. Kelvin can't believe his eyes. This can't possibly be the same Robbie Weirdick who was humiliated in front of the entire school. As they catch up, Bob casually mentions he used to work as a federal contractor, but was recently let go. The two laugh and bond until Bob steps away to grab drinks. While he's gone, another man tries to take Bob's seat. Kelvin attempts to resolve the situation diplomatically, but when Bob returns, the mood shifts dramatically. Without hesitation, Bob beats the man senseless, grabs Kelvin, and drags him out of the pub before anyone can react. Still in shock, Kelvin follows Bob to their old high school, where nostalgia and unresolved emotions come flooding back. Bob reflects on the trauma of his humiliation, while Kelvin confesses his frustrations about not living up to the potential everyone once saw in him. To lighten the mood, Bob urges Kelvin to perform the legendary backflip he was known for in high school. Encouraged, Kelvin gives it a try, only for the attempt to go hilariously wrong, sending him crashing to the ground in an embarrassing condition. The night continues at Kelvin's house, where Bob casually asks for help with a parole issue. Confused, but trying to be polite, Kelvin agrees to investigate it. When he checks the laptop, he finds something far more concerning: offshore accounts containing millions of dollars. Bob's attempt to explain is cut short when he accidentally spills beer on the laptop, frying it. Shrugging off the chaos, Bob asks if he can crash at Kelvin's place for the night. Reluctantly, Kelvin agrees. The next morning, a loud knock at the door jolts Kelvin to his feet. Standing outside is a team of CIA agents, led by the no-nonsense Agent Harris. Barge in, demanding to know where Bob is. Kelvin tries to explain that Bob stayed the night, but when the agents search the house, there's no trace of him. Harris reveals shocking information. Bob is wanted for treason, murder, and stealing classified information, which he allegedly plans to sell to enemy nations. Kelvin is stunned when Harris adds that Bob listed him as his emergency contact on official documents. Panicking, Kelvin denies knowing anything, realizing he's been pulled into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. At work, Kelvin gets an unexpected call from Bob, who casually mentions he's hiding somewhere in the building. Kelvin, panicked and desperate to distance himself from the chaos, immediately alerts the CIA. Agent Harris and her team storm the office, but Bob, as slippery as ever, outmaneuvers them with ease. Setting off the sprinklers, he creates a scene of pure chaos, soaking everyone and turning the office into a waterlogged war zone. Before Kelvin can slip away, Bob confronts him. He demands. Kelvin, drenched and frantic, insists he wants nothing to do with whatever this is. Bob, undeterred, declares that Kelvin's already in too deep. With dramatic flair, Bob ignites a tie tied to the sprinkler system, triggering another round of alarms and pandemonium. During the madness, Bob tackles Kelvin, declaring him a hostage as Kelvin flees flails helplessly. The CIA agents burst in, leading to an all-out shootout with Bob. Kelvin tries to crawl to safety, but ends up hilariously tangled in a mail cart, becoming an accidental participant in the chaos. Even without helmets, Kara was carefully controlling a pace, despite almost soundlessly. Bob takes down several agents with impressive skill, but the tide turns when one agent manages to wrap a chain around his neck. Desperate, Bob yells to Kelvin for help. Kelvin, now holding a gun he has no idea how to use, accidentally fires it. To his shock and Bob's relief, the shot hits the agent, freeing Bob. Before the CIA can recover, Bob knocks out another agent, throws Kelvin into a postal cart, and charges toward the exit. Just as they're about to escape, Agent Harris and her team block their path. Kelvin, still hoping to salvage some sense of normalcy, attempts to negotiate. Harris cuts him off, insisting he turn himself in. Bob, ever resourceful, triggers the sprinklers again and tosses a flash bomb, disorienting the agents. With a dramatic leap, he and Kelvin crash through a window, landing on an inflatable gorilla outside. Amid a hail of gunfire, the pair scrambles into an Uber and speeds away. Kelvin, still processing the insanity of the last few minutes, demands answers. Bob, calm as ever, explains that the stolen encryption keys are part of a U.S. spyware system capable of compromising national security. Bob insists, as if this is the most obvious thing in the world. Kelvin, however, is less than convinced. He demands Bob turn himself in, but Bob reminds him that they're both now considered fugitives and need to clear their names first. Frustrated, Kelvin grills Bob about Harris's accusations, pointing out that she claimed Bob stole the codes. Bob denies it, explaining that he and his partner, Phil, were tracking the notorious Black Badger during a mission. According to Bob, Phil was killed in an elevator explosion, and Harris framed him for both Phil's death and the missing codes. Before Kelvin can fully process this wild story, their Uber ride takes a sharp turn. Literally, a motorcyclist slams into the window, striking Bob in the face with a spinning tire. Bob, unfazed, retaliates by throwing a metal pipe into the bike's wheels, sending the rider flying. While Bob deals with the chaos, Kelvin seizes the opportunity to escape on the motorbike. "You've got this, buddy," Kelvin shouts over his shoulder, leaving Bob to handle the rest of the fight solo. Kelvin, desperate for normalcy, calls Maggie and urges her to meet him at their therapist's office instead of going home. Maggie immediately notices something is off. Before Kelvin can explain, Agent Harris shows up, forcing him into a van for questioning. Harris accuses Bob of being the Black Badger, claiming he betrayed his partner to steal the codes. However, she admits that Kelvin's cooperation is crucial, since Bob clearly trusts him. Kelvin reluctantly agrees to help. Armed with a tracking device, Kelvin is sent into the field to lure Bob out of hiding. At the therapist's office, Kelvin's plan takes an awkward turn when Bob unexpectedly joins the session. Playing along with the therapy games, Bob dives into the role with enthusiasm, much to Kelvin's horror. Tension builds as Kelvin tries to keep Maggie from suspecting anything, but his growing frustration gets the better of him. When Kelvin finally snaps, Maggie mistakes his outburst for a lack of commitment to their marriage. Heartbroken, she storms out, leaving Kelvin devastated and more entangled in Bob's chaos than ever. After Maggie storms out, Bob convinces Kelvin to help him, assuring him that he's fighting for the right cause. Reluctantly, Kelvin agrees, and the two decide to track down Trevor, Bob's high school bully, who may have access to critical transaction details. At first, Trevor greets them with a polite and almost apologetic demeanor. He even offers a half-hearted apology to Bob for how he treated him in the past. But the act doesn't last long. Trevor's smirk returns as he mockingly admits he hasn't changed at all. He doubles down on his insults, reveling in his past cruelty. Bob, visibly shaken by the encounter, shuts down and walks away without a word. Kelvin, however, isn't about to let Trevor off the hook. He confronts Trevor, chastises him for his behavior, and manages to retrieve the transaction number himself. On the way out, Kelvin receives a call from Agent Harris, who delivers an ultimatum: turn Bob in or Maggie will be charged with conspiracy. Outside, Bob apologizes to Kelvin, admitting that Kelvin was the only person who ever treated him with kindness. He promises never to betray Kelvin, but guilt overwhelms Kelvin, and he confesses that he's already given their location to Harris. Within moments, the CIA arrives, capturing both Bob and Kelvin. While restrained, Kelvin is consumed with regret as he hears Harris interrogating and torturing Bob at a secret facility. Unable to stomach the betrayal, Kelvin takes matters into his own hands. He overpowers an agent, grabs a weapon, and forces his way into Bob's room. Inside, Kelvin frees Bob and subdues Harris, who warns Kelvin that he's making a huge mistake. Despite the warning, Kelvin stands firm, determined to do what he believes is right. As they escape, Bob seems shaken and begins doubting himself. He insists he's just Robbie the tool and denies being a spy. Kelvin confronts him, reminding Bob that his self-made persona, Bob Stone, isn't just a mask, it's who he's become. Drawing a parallel to his own nickname, Golden Jet, Kelvin encourages Bob to own his identity and rise above his past. The pep talk works, and when Bob finds his resolve, they shake hands. But Kelvin notices Bob's fractured finger, a silent reminder of the risks they've taken. The two work together to escape, with Kelvin unexpectedly taking out several agents along the way, even surprising himself. "Maybe I'm a natural at this," he quips, before quickly realizing he's committing serious crimes. When a stolen keycard fails to work, Bob calmly handles the problem by holding an agent at gunpoint to force their way out. They steal a vehicle, and Bob hands Kelvin a phone, instructing him to input the transaction codes into a map. The data leads them to Boston, but they need a plane to get there. At a private airstrip, Kelvin distracts a security guard with a hilariously overcomplicated story, while Bob sneaks into the hangar and pulls a plane onto the runway. As they take off, Kelvin begins piecing things together and voices his suspicion that Agent Harris might be the Black Badger. When they land, the designated meeting location seems too exposed. Kelvin spots an underground parking garage nearby and deduces that the trade must be happening there. Bob suggests they split up, but Kelvin refuses, insisting they stay in contact in case things go sideways. Bob enters the parking garage, and it's clear the criminals are expecting him. Meanwhile, Kelvin, trying to be stealthy, spots Harris arriving on the scene. Convinced she's the Black Badger, Kelvin follows her, but quickly gets caught up in the chaos. Inside the garage, Bob hands a package to the buyer, but just as the deal seems to be proceeding, the shocking truth is revealed. Phil, Bob's supposedly dead partner, steps out of the shadows. Grinning, he declares himself the real Black Badger. Kelvin arrives at the worst possible moment, finding both Bob and Phil accusing each other of being the traitor. Before anyone can make sense of the situation, Harris bursts in, guns blazing, and chaos erupts. Kelvin ducks behind cover, clutching the drives as bullets fly in every direction. Amid the chaos, Kelvin makes a break for it, as if his life depends on it, because it does. A buyer pursues him in a car, but Bob swoops in, narrowly rescuing Kelvin in the nick of time, followed by a series of early scheduled. As Kelvin keeps running, he ends up cornered on a bridge. There, the final showdown begins. Bob and Phil confront Kelvin, each desperately trying to convince him of their innocence. Kelvin, caught between the two and holding the fate of mission in his hands, must decide who to trust. A chaotic shootout erupts, with Kelvin caught in the crossfire. In a panic, he accidentally shoots Bob. Horrified, Kelvin tries to aim at Phil, but his gun clicks. Empty. Phil, smug as ever, taunts Kelvin, calling Bob too weak to ever be the Black Badger. He recounts with pride how he faked his death and framed Bob for everything, savoring his villainous monologue like he's auditioning for a spy movie. Phil orders Kelvin to kneel, clearly enjoying his moment of power. Desperate and out of options, Kelvin attempts his infamous golden jet flip as a last-ditch distraction. Predictably, the flip goes hilariously wrong, leaving Kelvin sprawled on the ground, but the stunt gives Bob just enough of an opening. Summoning his strength, Bob takes down Phil in brutal fashion, even ripping out his trachea before tossing him unceremoniously into the river. With the crisis finally resolved, Bob and Kelvin hand them over to Agent Harris. Surprisingly, she thanks them for their service, even suggesting Kelvin consider a career with the CIA. Kelvin, still processing the chaos, gives her a half-hearted laugh, clearly unsure if she's joking. At the high school reunion, Maggie confronts Kelvin, demanding answers about his recent bizarre behavior. Before Kelvin can stammer out an explanation, Bob steps in, charming Maggie with his humor and even joking about bringing their therapist to the event. Kelvin, now more confident, tells Maggie that she's the reason he's happy with his life and that nothing else matters. Moved by his honesty, Maggie smiles and they share a heartfelt kiss. Inside the gym, the prom king and queen are announced. To everyone's surprise, Bob is crowned prom king. Stunned, he hesitates for a moment, clearly overwhelmed. Of course, Trevor, still clinging to his bully persona after 20 years, seizes the opportunity to mock Bob in front of everyone. But this time, Bob doesn't cower. With a confident stride, he punches Trevor square in the face, knocking him out cold. Bob takes the microphone and delivers an emotional speech, thanking Kelvin for helping him accept himself and reminding everyone that it's never too late to embrace who you truly are. The crowd erupts in applause. In a moment of self-liberation, Bob removes his clothes, standing proudly in front of the entire room. But instead of the ridicule he once feared, Bob is met with cheers and admiration. The gym, once the site of his greatest humiliation, becomes the stage for his ultimate redemption. To top it all off, Bob reconnects with his high school crush, who flirts with him and seals the moment with a kiss. Months later, Kelvin and Maggie prepare for their growing family, with Maggie visibly pregnant. Outside their home, Bob arrives to wish Kelvin luck on his first day with the CIA. As a token of their friendship, Bob hands Kelvin his old high school blazer, a symbol of how far they've both come. The film ends with Kelvin and Bob driving off into the sunset, their unlikely friendship stronger than ever. It's the perfect mix of absurdity and heartfelt connection, proving that even the strangest bonds can be the most meaningful.